The men's restroom for the ladies. If you go out here, go to the left, there's a ladies' restroom on this side. After our first session that starts right now, probably about 7:45, we'll have a little break. We've got some snacks over in the room over here, just some light refreshments if you need a little pick-me-up. And then we'll have our second session after that. All right, thanks, Lonnie.
Well, it is a pleasure to be here. I know lots of folks in the room and have had a relationship with this congregation, coming and doing various events and being welcomed into your home. When you attend a seminar, you will either get information or confirmation. You'll either get something that you didn't know, or you'll go, hey, I already knew that, and it's still working. So, don't expect me to do something that makes your mind go, phew. When people say, hey, you did a seminar for us 10 years ago, will you do another one? I said, well, the information hadn't changed. What works, and we'll try to do a little bit of just exegetical study, what the Bible says about relationships, and then we'll try to do some psychology. Because as a blend of my ministry and my private practice, I do an awful lot of relationship work. I do conflict resolution, crisis intervention for police. I do that for companies, a couple of universities. I'm finishing up a contract with Mazda Toyota next week. I've been talking to their line level supervisors. And then I do a lot of stuff with blended families and parents. So let's start out first with just some rules of engagement. I may tell you some things that are uncomfortable, and you're welcome to not like it or disagree with it. If what I say, and you go, hey, we've tried that, we've done that, and that's the exception, we're the exception to the rule, that stuff doesn't work. I'm not going to be able to solve that in the foyer between sessions, okay? So if you're that exception and we need to talk in Huntsville at my place, because we're not going to be able to do that here. And the other part of that is the biblical theme is relationships. God understood that when he made man and woman, that he was going to make people with a capacity for imperfection. And the Bible clearly teaches that in Ephesians, before the foundation of the world, before God made the first Adam, A-T-O-M or A-D-A-M, he said, these people are going to mess up and I can fix that. The biblical term for that is reconciliation. Reconciliation means to prepare or repair a broken relationship. When you get to the book of Ephesians, I think Paul will summarize everything God's doing with people as the cross. It's a plus sign. It brings God and people together and people together. And so it's always been God's intention that people live in harmony with each other and that people be reconciled to him, not separated by sin. And so when you look at that model, some of the passages that we'll talk about have zero to do with marriage and everything to do with people. Have zero to do with marriage and everything to do with our relationship with God. Well, anything that is true vertically is often true horizontally, if that makes any sense. If I tie a rope around this bench and I stretch it to this bench and it's banjo string tight where the angle of incident is 180 degrees, if I put pressure in the middle of that, I'll put 575% of the load on both those legs and I can pull them out of the floor. It's called a vector pull. Well, if my four-wheeler gets stuck in the woods and I tie a rope to it and stretch it to a string or stretch it to a tree, maybe put an alpine butterfly knot on it and do a 2-to-1 advantage and stretch it as tight as I get it, and I pull sideways, I put 575% of the load on that four-wheeler and move it. I'm not going to move the tree, so the lightest thing will move. So anything that's true vertical is also true horizontal. So the things that work between us and God should probably work between us and us. The things that work within the church should also work within the families of the church. And so we're going to just basically take some of those principles. And when I study the Bible, it's a pretty simple process. I read a text, and I'm looking for a couple of things. Facts, who, what, when, where, who's he writing to, how big, how high, how many. Facts lead to concepts. Concepts lead to applications. So the concepts of love, loyalty, purity, faithfulness, controlling your temper, all those things, whether they're specifically talking about marriage or not, I believe are applicable in those relationships. And so those are kind of the rules of engagement. I don't mind if you raise your hand and ask a question while we're talking. I get to talking about this stuff and I'll just talk. And so if I need to pump the brakes or go back and do something or whatever, then feel free to say, hey, well, elaborate on that or whatever, and I'll be glad to make this kind of a dialogue thing. I've got an iPad that I'm going to try to draw on. I'm not a technology guy. I walked into the Arab Church of Christ. There is such a place in Alabama named Arab. It was supposed to be Arad. The postmaster turned the letter wrong. And they said, hey, we're supposed to be Arad. He said, well, it's Arab. Deal with it. And so I walked in to speak, and I was almost late. And the audiovisual deacon handed me a little mic and a box. And I put it on, stepped in the front of the audience, and I said something, and it wasn't amplified. And I looked at it. One button said no. Well, I'm not about to turn it to no. Things will blow up on you. And then I realized no is on, upside down. So if I start trying to use this iPad as a whiteboard and it goes south, we'll just chunk it and do something else. So, it's not anybody's fault but mine if it doesn't work. So Matthew 19. Now it came to pass when Jesus had finished these sayings, he departed from Galilee and came to the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. And great multitudes followed him there, and he healed them there. The Pharisees also came to him, testing him. Now this is already a disclaimer. This is a disingenuous question. They're not asking him for information. They're not asking him for confirmation. They're going to trap him. The Pharisees came to him, testing him, and said, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason? Now, how many of you have the word just in your translation? You notice the word just is italicized. Anytime you see an italicized word in the King James, the New King James, or the ASV, the translators have added it. Okay? They want you to understand the gist of this verse. So although King James, New King James, ASV are literal translations, sometimes they've tweaked it a little bit to give you a thought-for-thought translation. Because the question is, can you divorce your wife for any reason? Well, they're not asking, is there any reason you can divorce your wife? They're asking him, can you divorce your wife for just any reason? Now, the reason they're asking him that is because there's two rabbis. One is named Shammai, and one is named Hillel. And in the New Testament, these rabbis were super, super prominent, and they were having a debate. There was two schools of thought. They'd taken the verse out of Deuteronomy, and one of the rabbis had taken the verse says, if a man marries a wife and she becomes displeasing to him, and he stopped there. If she becomes displeasing to you, done. She dyes her hair, cuts her hair, burns the biscuits, doesn't mop, gets a cat, whatever. If she does something you don't like, you can tell her bye. The other rabbi said, no. The verse says if she becomes displeasing to you because of some unclean thing, you can divorce her. And so the question of the two schools of thought were, where can you divorce your wife? Now, the reason this is a problem is because in the New Testament in the first century, about the end of the book of Ezra, there's a 400-year period between the end of the book of Ezra and the beginning of Matthew. You've got a silent period. And so the rabbis began to interpret the law, the Midrash and the Mishnah. They made commentary on the law. Well, you've got four basic large groups of Jewish believers. You have a group of Jewish believers that were your Essenes. And your Essenes were basically your Amish Jews. They were Throwback Thursday. They didn't want their kids to speak Greek. They only wanted them to read the Hebrew Scriptures. They would probably lived in a community outside of Jerusalem called Qumran, and they would have probably preserved what we now know as the Dead Sea Scrolls, because they had a copy of the book of Isaiah that was 1,500 years older than anything we've ever uncovered, and they had preserved it there. We think John the Baptizer was probably part of this group because of his costume. He wore non-traditional clothing, shall we say. And so this group would have been really locked into the old ways. They were strictly against the Hellenization or the Greekification of their kids. They would not have read the Septuagint, which was a Greek translation. They'd have been stuck into Hebrew or Aramaic. You had a second group of Jews known as the Zealots. And the Zealots were basically your concealed carry Jews. They would have had a Star of David with Milan Labe in it. And, they wanted the Romans kicked out. They wanted the Messiah to be a military leader. They wanted the prominence of Israel as a powerful nation state to come back. And so they would have been willing to watch the whole thing burn down to have freedom. And then you had a group of Jews known as the Sadducees. The Sadducees were the meritocracy of the group. They believed that money was righteousness and righteousness was money. They did not believe in the afterlife. They didn't believe in ghosts. They didn't believe in spirits. They didn't believe in angels. They didn't believe in demons. And they didn't believe in the resurrection. They thought when you were dead, you were like Rover, you were dead all over. They believed Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy were inspired, and none of the rest of the Old Testament had the inspiration of God. And they basically controlled the temple treasury, and often were the guys who bought and sold the high priest. And then you have the Pharisees. The Pharisees were the separatists. They were the guys who were the holy ones. They believed that Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy were inspired. They believed the wisdom literature was inspired. They believed the prophets were inspired. And by the time you get to the intertestamental period, they also believed the rabbis were inspired. So the oral tradition of the law, Rabbi Ben Akmar says this, it was law. Well, I've got this rabbi who says this and this rabbi who says this. Well, if they're both inspired, that creates a problem. And so they bring this problem to Jesus, and they've made their minds up what they believe. They know which camp they're sitting in, but they just simply want Jesus to choose so that he'll lose half his audience. Oh, this guy's with this camp. And so this is a testing question, and they're trying to entrap him. Now, Shemaiah was had the more conservative interpretation that your wife had to do some unclean thing sexually. Now, probably that doesn't talk about adultery, because in the Old Testament, if a female committed adultery, what happened to her? You stoned her. So this is, did you find out that she wasn't a virgin? Did you find out that she'd been a prostitute? Did you find out that she had not been pure on your... If it was some unclean thing, you could divorce her. And that was Shemaiah. The liberal guy was Hillel. I remember that for the test, because that's where he was going, straight to Hillel. So he was the liberal guy. So I made a B. All right. So they bring him this question, choose between Shemaiah and Hillel, and this is his answer. And he answered and said to them, have you not read? Pharisees and Sadducees are going to believe in the reading of Genesis. And then have you not read that he who made them from the beginning? So this is not what did Moses say. This is not the Noahic law. This is not what some rabbi says. This is not what's in the Talmud. This is not what's in the Mishnah. This is what was written by Moses from God. Have you not read that he who made them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. So Jesus said, if you want to look at what God's intention for marriage was, God's intention for marriage is that you don't get divorced. You don't split this thing up. Now, there's some exceptions in the New Testament, but the pattern here was that you don't take this thing that God created, where his design was that a man and a woman combine their lives and become one, and you don't just willy-nilly get rid of that. And so we call it biblical math. And in biblical math, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. 1/2 + 1/2 doesn't equal a whole, by the way. Okay? If you get into a relationship, you're not finding somebody that makes you happy. You're finding somebody that shares your happy. I'm happy, you're happy, we share our happiness together. But if I'm unhappy and it's your job to make me happy, I'm just giving you a burden you can't bear. Okay? 2 halves don't make a whole. I can take 2 halves of a hammer. If they're both handles, I ain't got a hammer. Okay? I just got 2 handles. This is fixer-upper project. This is when 2 healthy people get together. So part of what we're going to do in this seminar is talk about my personal responsibility in my relationship to be the healthy partner. And so you often ask, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, where's your marriage? And I don't really, care what number you come up with. I live in Huntsville, Alabama. Numbers mean different things to engineers than they do us normal folks. So I don't ever ask but on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, where's your marriage? Now, what would it take to change your 5 to a 6, your 7 to an 8, your 8 to a 9? And what's the first thought that came to your mind? Often in therapy, the first thought that comes to somebody's mind when they talk out loud, well, if he would, well, if she would, And we begin to give away the efficacy of our happiness and our well-being and our satisfaction to the other person. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best towards your marriage, and what could you change to make the 6 a 7, an 8 to a 9, a 9 to a 10? Because really the only thing we're going to be in control of in our own marriage is ourselves. And that's it. And understanding that the problem with us is me. Now, that doesn't mean there's not some situations where there may be a narcissist or a sociopath or something like that. But really, when you come to a marriage seminar, you're not there to find ammunition to change your partner. You're there to find, hey, how do I make myself the better person? And so we'll use this as an operational definition. Love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into the good of another. Okay, that's part A. Love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into the good of another. I'm choosing to put your needs above my rights. And in some cases, I'm choosing to put your wants above my wants. In some cases, I'm choosing to put your likes above my likes simply because I'm doing that for you. Now, when you do that, it has to be giving. It can't be giving in, and it can't be giving up. Because if I'm giving in or giving up, then I'm keeping score, and the person who keeps score always feels like they're losing. Okay, the person who's winning doesn't try to keep score. He's winning, he's okay with that. But the person who says, well, I did this for you and you didn't do that for me, and I did this for you and you didn't, no, it's got to be giving. If it's giving in or giving up, then you're creating a pitfall for your own mental status to say, I'm dissatisfied in this relationship. So love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into the good of another. It does not require reciprocity. I can choose to love you when you can't do anything back for me. Now, in American society, we love each other because we get Twitter-pated and there's limerence and we, go through all this courting process. So we really do actually come into, I love you because you love me and I love you, and we have the ability to do that. Everything written about marriages in the New Testament was probably written to people in arranged marriages. And so it wasn't necessarily about reciprocity. I'm going to treat you like I'd like to be treated if I were you. And that's selfless. That's the way that Jesus treated us. So love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment to the good of another. It does not require reciprocity, and it is not contingent upon you being deserving. I choose to love you when you're unlovable because I made a promise to love you. And that's it. You choose to love a 2-year-old. Am I wrong? 2-year-olds is why animals eat their young. I'm just telling you right now. Okay? You choose to love a 14-year-old girl because they suffer from emotional dysregulation. Their intellectual brain and their emotional brain can now talk to each other, and they can think and upset themselves. And their division between what is ideal and what is unacceptable is razor thin. And if I didn't do it all, I didn't do any. If I can't have it now, I can't ever have it. If that one doesn't like me, nobody will ever like me. I'll never have a boyfriend again. And so you live hip deep in drama and hormones. Okay? Well, you choose to love a 2-year-old. You choose to love a 14-year-old. You can choose to love an adult. You can choose to love an adult male when he acts like a 14-year-old. You can choose to love an adult female when she acts like a 2-year-old. So marriage is going to be an attitude. It's going to be a choice. So here's what happens to us. This is a little thing we call the marriage go-around. So when you get married, the first thing that happens is you move into this stage, and this stage is called romance. Now, what happens in romance? Everything is wonderful and great. And you look at each other through a filter of rose-tinted glasses made out of unicorn horns held in place by butterflies. And every time you sneeze, fairy dust comes out, right? That's what happens. And we're just going to love each other. We're just going to live on love. In my podcast, I've got an episode of when I had my daughter's wedding dress in the back of the tactical Toyota. I had body armor, a helmet, rappelling rope, a tactical tomahawk, and a wedding dress. And I had to go pick it up from this little fairy dust thing. Now, I had to wash my truck. Anyway, when you start dating somebody, you ignore the things. in the Simbas book, Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts, it will have a section that says, you find this attractive about your husband now, but as you get deep into marriage, you'll also find it annoying. So this is all good. Romance is great, but romance cycles into this thing that we call reality. Now, what happens when romance hits reality? Well, that's when the rose-colored glasses come off. That's when things that you would describe in one section gets described differently in another section. I'm dating this young man, and he is a foreign national, and he is unencumbered by the mores of a capitalistic society. Doesn't that sound great? Write a book about that. Then you get married. He's an illegal alien and he's unemployed. Okay? That's the truth about the fool. All right? She's so spontaneous. She's disorganized. She doesn't care anything about money. She's frivolous. And so all of a sudden, this idea of it's going to be perfect and great and the two becomes one, and we get married and romance runs into reality. Now, when romance runs into reality, there's a couple of things you can do. One of the things that a lot of people do is they recycle. And so you come up here and you go find somebody else to be in romance with. That's what America teaches. Hey, if you're not satisfied, just get rid of it. Just do it again, and do it again, and do it again, and do it again. What most people find out when they're unhappy in a marriage is they say, I'm unhappy, and I'm unhappy because of you. And then they get rid of the you, and they're still unhappy. Happiness is an internal construct. It's not an external construct. And we'll talk about this maybe in depth, but I really can't make you happy or mad. I can choose to do some things, and there's a smart and a dumb on that. But if I could make you mad, I could make you happy. If I could make you cheat, I could make you faithful. If I could make you drink, I could make you sober. If I could make you leave church, I could make you stay here every Sunday. If I could make you kill yourself, I could keep you alive. Because if the light switch turns them on, the light switch will turn it off. And if it doesn't work both ways, it's not a light switch. So when somebody says, my husband makes me mad, my wife makes me mad, no, they're saying something and you're choosing to do it. Other people's words, other people's actions really only have the power you give them. Romans chapter 1, verse 16. I am not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God to salvation to everyone who, what? Believes. God's word on this side of eternity is limited by the investment I give it. God says something and I choose not to believe it, has no effect in my life. Well, if God's word is limited by that, then my word definitely is limited by that. My words only have the power you give them. And so thinking that this other person is the source of my happiness or thinking this other person is the source of my unhappiness is an unrealistic cognitive distortion. So I get into romance, I run into reality, and I decide that I'm not going to recycle. Well, sometimes since we can't recycle because we have these mores against divorce, then we just live in resentment. Tim Oberson calls it the doldrums. You know what the doldrums are, right? It's an area of the sea that has no waves and no wind. And your boat gets there and goes, wah. And you can only sit in a still boat in the middle of the ocean for so long. You run out of food, you run out of water, and you start eating each other. Okay? And so some people go, okay, this is where we're at on a scale of 1 to 10. My marriage is a 5, and it'll never be better than a 5, and I'm just going to deal with it. I'm just going to suck it up. We're going to stay together for the kids. Let me tell you, if you're living in a dysfunctional relationship, you're not doing your kids any favors by staying together. You're teaching them it's better to look good than to be good. You're teaching them how to be duplicitous in public. You're teaching them that we can go put on our church face and pretend and then come home and hate each other. And they grow up and will recreate this idea that it's better to look good than to actually be good. And kids who grow up in a formula like that start worrying about superficial relationships. They start worrying about superficial Christianity. They start living in ways where they can't know we're fighting. They can't know we're having problems. You can't tell anybody this. And so they grow up not thinking they can't be good. They grow up thinking they can't be good enough. And it's because of this idea that they're living with people who are living like this. We show everybody this in public. And we fight like cats and dogs in private. Okay? So you can't live in resentment. Or you can renovate. And when you renovate, what you're doing is you're reinvesting, you're building a set of skills to make this thing work. And I'm the only person who can build skills for me. You can't build skills for me. I can't build skills for you. And so ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to build this love pyramid or this love house. Now, you remember the old food pyramid, right? In the 5th grade? By the way, they've told us that that was wrong. That may be the worst nutritional thing they ever came up with. And by the way, other things that are wrong, if you run and are really, really tired and you bend over like this, that's the best position you can get in to recover cardiovascularly. How many of you had a coach say, get your hands off your knees and walk around like this? Every coach I've ever had owes me a written apology because now they've discovered that this is a good way to recover, and the best recovery drink you can drink on the planet is chocolate milk, the nectar of the gods. Anyway, the food pyramid was wrong, and so this is our love pyramid. And the top of this love pyramid is just that. You're going to reach this attitudinal love. Love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into the good of another. It doesn't require reciprocity, and it doesn't wait on you to deserve it. It's an attitude, not an emotion. And as we talk about healthy emotions, because we are emotional creatures, we've been given emotions, and we often live with our emotions. There's no emotion you can have that you shouldn't have. And we'll talk about this some tomorrow when you talk to your parent, you talk to your spouse or your kids in crisis. You can't be emotion dismissing, you can't be emotion denying, and you can't be emotion disapproving. You get to have the emotions you get to have. But what you have to understand about your emotions is they are information. They are not instruction. And we get dysfunctional and we get our wheels in the ditch and we make choices in an emotional mindset when we think that our emotions tell us to do something rather than just tell us something. Okay? It's about an hour drive from here to my house. If I were going to commute tonight, when we finished, I would get in the truck. I would call my wife and say, honey, I'm headed home. Well, I'm 60, and if you read my whole bio, one of my hobbies is frequent urination, rock climbing, jiu-jitsu, and frequent urination. I'm 60, I have to go to the bathroom, okay? And so I'll stop and call my wife, honey, I have to stop at the bathroom. And 45 minutes later, I get back in the car and say, okay, I'm back in the car. She says, hey, what took you so long? Well, I walked into the little Zippy Mart, and there was a sign that said clean restrooms. And I had to get a mop and a bucket and some rubber gloves. Couldn't find a water hose, and that guy wouldn't share the soap with me. And she'll say, no, that sign didn't tell you to clean the restrooms. The sign tells you the restrooms are clean. Information, instruction. Okay? Your emotions tell you something. They don't tell you to do anything. And if I let my emotions tell me that I'm in love, how many of you have seen people get on the rocks in their marriage and I love him, but I'm not in love anymore? No, that's a choice you make. That's an attitude. I'm going to choose to have this higher place where I say, regardless of what you do, regardless of what you say, regardless of how you act, I've chosen to love you. Now, in order to get to that place where it's the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into your good, that has to be built on intimacy. And intimacy is that thing that Jesus talked about where the two become one. Now, if you really talk about intimacy, and I'll see if I can do this here. When you start out in a relationship, you have these layers around you. And I should probably do this with squares because this is eventually going to look like fried eggs for those of you who are hungry. So that's me, that's you, and we meet each other, and you've got your walls up, and I've got my walls up, and there's things that I don't tell you, and there's things that you don't tell me. And as we get closer together, what begins to happen is some of those walls start to break down. And as we build a further relationship, those walls break down. And eventually what the Bible talks about is two become one. And to the degree that this is the me that's me and this is the you that's you, to the degree that we have overlap, we have a very healthy relationship. If I don't share your worldview, if I don't share your mythos, if we don't have a shared meaning, if we don't have shared goals and dreams, we don't get along very well. And so, sometimes people get into relationships and there's no chemistry. They just look good on paper. I've seen lots of terrible relationships come out of private Christian schools where everybody's there and everybody's in the Christian subculture and they really don't get to know each other very well. And they build this relationship on a false facade where it's easy to be spiritual when you're surrounded by Freed kids. It's easy to be spiritual when you're surrounded by Faulkner kids. It's easy to be spiritual when you're surrounded by Harding kids. And they get away from that environment and they're really not compatible spiritually. The statistic, I think, is that 7 out of 10 religiously mixed marriages fail. That's a devastating statistic. And that doesn't mean Protestant Catholic. That doesn't mean believer, unbeliever. It means that, but it doesn't only mean that. It means conservative versus liberal. It means dedicated versus not dedicated. It means that I don't have the same worldview. And so 7 out of 10 religiously mixed marriages don't work because they can't have this overlap that's right in here. And of course, ideally, the two become one. It really doesn't look like this. It really would be there's 2 circles there. You just can't tell there's 2 circles because the 2 people became one. And that's the biblical idea. Now, if you go back to this, you have this attitude that is built on this connectedness. The husband's body doesn't belong to him. The wife's body doesn't belong to her. We are one in Christ. We are one in each other. You have to build that intimacy, and you can only build intimacy based on trust. Now, this is where the rubber meets the road. How do you choose who you trust? And how do you become a person of trust? How do you know who to trust? And how do you become a person that people trust? If I want us to connect and there be no walls and there be no barriers and there be no separations between us, and you're going to trust me enough that we're connected as one and that I can choose to sacrifice for you, how do you build trust? Can anybody in the room define trust? Isn't that cool? We have this word we use all the time, and you start trying to define it, you go like, well, and everything you think about trust is accurate, but it's a facet of what I'm talking about. Trust is built on a foundation, and it has to do with your relationship with self. And you can be selfish or selfless. Guess which one of those builds trust? And guess which one of those destroys trust? When you read Ephesians 5, that husbands love your wives as Christ loved the church, and wives be submissive to your husbands as the church is to Christ. You know why the church was completely 100% submissive to Christ? Because he put her needs above his rights. He was submissive to the needs of the church. He gave himself for her. He died for her. Every decision Christ ever made went against his own personal well-being and for the being of the church. And when someone is selfless, you automatically, instinctively trust them. And when someone is selfish, you don't trust them. Now think about that. Think about the people you really, 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 really trust. They're not selfish. And think about the people that you really, really, really don't trust. They're selfish. Am I wrong? You go buy a new truck. I'm going to go buy a truck. And this guy walks out and he needs to sell a truck. You've had that buying experience, haven't you? Well, I was really looking for a 4-door. Yeah, but we got this sweet little deal on a 2-door. No, you're not listening to me. I want a 4-door truck. Jackie said, why do you need an extended cab truck? I said, well, I carry body armor, I carry a helmet, I carry a medical pack, I carry a rappelling rope. I got all this gear I have to have in my truck all the time. And she said, well, by the time you scoot the seat up, you'll have all that room. You can't talk. Anyway, but this guy's not listening to me. You know why? He needs to sell a truck. Or you go to this place and the guy walks out and says, hi, I'm Bob, I work here. What kind of truck do you need? What are you going to do in this little truck? You're going to hunt, you're going to fish, you're going to pull a boat. You're going to drive through the mud. You're going to get off-road. You're going to put mulch in the back of it. The guy who wants to sell me the truck I need versus the guy who needs to sell a truck. Those are two different buying experiences, aren't they? So when I come into the marriage and I come into a relationship, if I'm the boss of a company, if I'm the coach of a team, if I'm an elder at a church, the people will trust me depending on the measure of whether or not I'm selfish or whether or not I'm selfless. And so when I start thinking about how can I solve the problem that I have with other people? Well, people instinctively don't get drawn to me when I behave in ways that are selfish. Now, it's really, really interesting how you can identify whether you think somebody is selfish or selfless based on your own model. You guys familiar with love languages? Okay, love languages basically is this theory based on Jack Panske's 7 emotional command systems in the human brain. That there's you have these different facets in your brain, and when you're stimulated in that area, you feel more alive and you feel in the flow. Well, they took it and they kind of watered it down and they toned it down and said, basically, I tell people I love them either with gifts, quality time, words of affirmation, acts of service, or physical touch. And so I want you to know that I love you, so I'm giving you gifts. Or I want you to know that I love you, I do things for you. I want you to know that I love you, I've always got my hands on you. Okay? And depending on how you say that you love somebody, you often want them to say it back to you that way. It's just the way we are. I don't mean to creep you out, but I beg Jackie all the time to rub my shoulders. You may have noticed I have little bitty short body parts, and all my muscles are bunched together. They put 10 pounds of sugar in a 5-pound sack. And so when you rub my shoulders, I want you to squeeze like you're trying to pull a steel cable apart. Well, she has little tiny little delicate hands, and she doesn't have that kind of strength, and she doesn't do it. You know how she likes to have her shoulders rubbed? Because if I rub her shoulders, you know what she says to me? Ow, that hurts. Stop it, you're squeezing too hard. She wants me to touch her shoulders like a spider is river dancing on her. And you might as well just hit me in the head with a pan. I don't enjoy that at all. I rub her shoulders like I want mine rubbed, and she rubs mine like she wants hers rubbed. It doesn't work for either of us. Love languages basically say, hey, I've got to figure out how you hear it, not how I like to say it. But if I don't say it like you like to hear it, I look really, really selfish. Because instead of doing gifts for you, I do acts of service. Or instead of doing acts of service for you, I do gifts. And so it's almost benign. He doesn't listen to me. He doesn't understand me. She doesn't listen to me. She doesn't understand me. Because even our attempts to say I love you sound selfish because we're using the wrong language. Does that make sense? So this came home to me hugely. I have a Kydex ninja sword. Kydex is a glass polymer thing that they're almost indestructible. Asked me why I had one. We had this element on our ropes course. You climb up and you balance on this pole. You pull this little sword out and you jump off and you ring a bell at about 40 feet in the air and you get caught on a rope, you float down. Well, we retired the ropes course. They built a receiving center where the ropes course was, and so we got out of the ropes course business. So I've got this ninja sword that I really don't do much with. Well, my grandson was at the house playing with it. He was beating up a punching bag with my ninja sword, which is cool. So they go home, and I think, he plays with this. I don't. I think I'll send him a ninja sword. So I get a tube, I stick it in there, and get it all wrapped up, and I thought, what am I going to give Sissy Bear? So I called Lonnie Beth. I said, hey, look, I'm sending Gunner a ninja sword. What do I need to send Rowan? Does she need a sword? Now I just send her some lip gloss. I said, what? She said, just send her some lip gloss. She'll be okay. I said, are you telling me that my daughter has raised a daughter that had rather have lip gloss than a ninja sword? You have failed as a parent. I'll not tolerate this at all. She goes, Dad, do you want her to have what she wants, or do you want her to have what you want her to want? Do you want your spouse to get what they want, or do you want them to have what you want them to want? I'm going to figure out how you hear I love you, and I'm going to say it that way. And if I don't, you're going to read me as being incredibly selfish. And if I'm selfish, you don't trust me. And if you don't trust me, you can't be transparent. You can't be vulnerable. We can't talk. We can't share. We can't have shared meaning. We can't have shared conversations. And if we don't have shared meaning and shared conversation, then we don't have intimacy. And if we don't have this overlap, if we don't have this connectedness, if we don't have this oneness, then there's no motivation for me to treat you with the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into your good. Because it's me versus you rather than us. And I can sit down with a couple and talk to them about them. And the usness and the we factor will tell me everything I need to know about why they're having trouble. Because if the story of you is me and my and I, or the story of you is us and ours, that's a completely different kind of thing. And so when you start thinking about the health of your relationship, the first thing you do is put it against the backdrop of, hey, where's love? Is it built on intimacy? Is it built on trust? And am I selfish or selfless? And Muriel Hemingway said the only difference in wellness and illness is we versus I. And so when we start thinking about how we build relationships where two become one, and so where the romance comes into reality, and instead of recycling and living in resentment, I'm going to renovate. I'm going to figure out some personal, individual skills that I can learn to do so that I can build selflessness, trust, intimacy, and love. And that's kind of going to be our path for the weekend. And we'll talk about the dynamic of trust when we come back from our break. Do we need to bless the snacks or say something like that? Or I don't know. I mean, you know. Okay, we can bless the snacks. You're going to call on somebody? You want me to handle it?
I was just going to give the quick instructions.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so through, if you go over here into the little wing area, there's a door. Once you go through the door, there's